being chased, thrown on the run, and it is caught. Touchdown, Keenan Allen. What a grab.
That's what I'm talking about. Hey, that's what I'm talking about. That's the warrior spirit right there, boy.
Huge sack by Joey Bosa.
90-yard touchdown. 90-yard touchdown.
It's going to be picked off at the 8-yard line by Derwin James.
Herbert sets his feet, takes a shot downfield, has Knighton. Caught. Touchdown Chargers.
That's the greatest throw I've ever seen.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Thunder Down Under Chargers podcast. I am Andy Prophet, joined by Jack Reed and Alistair Lloyd as per usual, and we are here to discuss the second of two parts, the NFL draft for this year. This week focusing on the offensive prospects, lots of sex appeal, really, out of some of these position groups. A lot of excitement on the social media and everywhere with what's going to happen at pick 5. Everyone gearing up for a fast car at wide receiver. Temper expectations, because that may not be the way. So don't want to disappoint yourself this early into the before the season's begun. We're going to kick things off today with the wide receivers. And look, it goes without saying that after it's been a pretty emotional offseason. With the wide receiver room, we've lost a hero, a legend in the Powder Blues, Keenan Allen, off to Chicago, traded out Mike Williams as well, and the cupboard has been left pretty bare. Josh Palmer currently sits as the wide receiver 1, and look, he really stepped up last year in their absence. Last year's first round pick, Quentin Johnson, sort of failed to live up to any kind of expectations, and sits behind him, and then Darius Davis sat in at the third wide receiver. Beyond that, Simi Fehoko holds the reserve futures contract. No more Alex Erickson, who was a bit of a cult hero later in the year. So like I said, wide receiver, synonymous with Chargers fans as being the pick at number 5, and there are some seriously good prospects there to be taken. It's been arguably the best class. Al, you've obviously gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. Probably the only time you use a comb. Says he.
Pots and kettles, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, pots and kettles indeed. Arguably the best receiver class for some time. And look, the top 3 guys who sort of, I think it's fair to say, stand out above all else, could have been the top wide receiver taken in the last 5-10 years, something like that. There's separation among the 3 of those guys who we're obviously going to get stuck into. But look, as mock drafts are flowing, there are as many as 6 or 7 receivers who could be snaffled up in the first round. Al, do us a favor, give us the rundown and the breakdown and the comparison between, the Marvin Harrison Jr., the Malik Neighbors, and the Rome Odunze discussion before we dig into the next tier.
Oh, let's do it, man. I am fired up. Like some people out there, they love being physically and emotionally available partners to their spouses and parents to 2 great young kids. Others like watching tape. Some like baking bread, changing switchboards. Others love football. And I have been buried into the discourse around wide receivers in particular. As we go through this, listeners, I have managed to watch 27 wide receivers in this class. For those 27, there's no player who I would have watched fewer than 3 games of. And some of the ones towards the top, I've watched closer to 10. So how we're going to break this up is I'm going to go through in kind of rankings of 5. We'll see if we can get to 25 of them, sort of 1 to 5, 6 to 10, and so on. And as we go, you guys feel free to stop. We can talk philosophy. I know you guys have also watched some of these players. So I'll cover off those top 3 as part of my top 5, Andy. So here are my rankings. Wide receiver 1A, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. And 1B, I have Malik Neighbors from LSU. Then I have a small little gap. My third wide receiver is Rome Odunze from Washington. And then I labored over this. I have 4A, Adonai Mitchell from Texas.
I like it.
And 4B, I have Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. Why that ooh reaction is because with AD Mitchell, there is some real boom or bust projection involved. He is a guy who has not produced at a level you would expect for a first round wide receiver. He had a couple of years with Georgia, then a couple with Texas, and he only has the 1,400 yards across his 3 seasons. He also has a habit of taking plays off or running routes without going at full speed. And occasionally you see this manifest as an interception. There was a quick slant against Oklahoma where that happened. And he explained that in his combine interview as a deliberate tactic so that he's not tired as drives develop and he'll pick and choose sort of how he wants to go and set up his defender. But I think there is a risk if you do that at the NFL level. I think you kind of need to go full boil on most routes, or you're going to find yourself picked off or bullied by some bigger cornerbacks. So he's an interesting one. I'll pause there and allow you guys to jump into any of them whatsoever. Jack, maybe you can start the conversation on my big 5.
Yeah, well, I think it's fairly comprehensive, and I don't see the only one is the 4B, which is or 3B. Did you have it, Adonai Mitchell? I can't remember what it was, but
4A, yeah,
4A, I should say. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably one of the best wide receivers I can remember watching out of college. Absolute freak. He has great hands. He's got great technique, which is the number one thing I always look for. And we might talk about a guy with some big techers later in that second tier. Incredible athlete. I think he can run all the routes in the route tree. I think he can also play with speed, but he can also set you up as a CB with his technique. I think he's incredible. I think there is a bit of a gap between not only physically and athletically and talent-wise, but also personality-wise between he and Neighbours. We might open the discussion up about the personality of Malik Neighbours, but I do have Marvin Harrison quite clear wide receiver 1. Neighbours just wants to go fast. He's probably the quickest out of all the guys that I've watched, just with that straight line speed, but also that speed at the top of routes, breaking in and out of them. But the rest, I think we'll have a little bit of a discussion about Adonai Mitchell in a second, but I kind of agree with everything that you've said there. Andy, anything from you?
I think with the AD Mitchell stuff, I found it very interesting to hear that he doesn't go kind of full tilt in his routes. But on the other side of that, at least he's got 4.34 40 speed. So he's got the gun loaded. It's just about pulling the trigger, right? Look, Jack, I think you've nailed it with Marv Harrison, and it's such a consistent point of view on him. At 6'3", he's like velvet. He just makes everything look so easy, and it's actually not as flashy. It is consistently awesome as it gets, but when you're looking at Malik Neighbours catches your eye because it's that immediate quickness. The knocks are. We'll get to the off-field stuff because it's scarred the Chargers in the past with JC Jackson. It's attitude things, it's body language things on the field, like, having his hands too low at the snap, getting into his routes. It's the want to have a little bit more nuance and manipulation in his routes rather than just relying straight up on speed, because you can kind of counter that by off-ball coverage, right? But yeah, the off-field stuff, there's real concerns about him being, in a big city, doesn't interview particularly well. I don't know, Al, do you think that we've spoken about this off the air with maybe going to Jim Harbaugh as being a solution to this attitude problem? He's also the nephew, I believe, of former brisket boy Gabe Neighbours, which is a little bit of a familiar ties to the Chargers. But what do you think about the attitude stuff? Or if you can go a little bit more in depth about it and how you think that could maybe be resolved coming to the Chargers?
Yeah, I'll definitely let Jack touch on the cultural aspect because that is clearly his domain as an organizational leader. But I thought it was interesting, guys. Jack with the eye roll, love it. I didn't know anything about any potential off-field concerns about Malik Neighbours. When I started watching him, I have a note that says, check this player's interview. he performed a bow and taunted the crowd at Tennessee after scoring a touchdown when his team was trailing by 35 points in the fourth quarter. Not a great look. So I've got that in my notes. And since then, I believe he's got an illegal weapons kind of misdemeanor in his past. And he's cocksure in his interviews, and he has talent to burn. So he's torched every player he came against in college football. So he's got that swagger that maybe you want in an elite wide receiver. But the closer we've got to draft day, there seems to be more focus on teams maybe having some concerns. His maturity in a city like LA. How do you see it, Jack?
I mean, just relying on some notes from the Ringers 2024 draft guide, the why he could rise and why he could fall, and perhaps I'll bring in a little bit of cultural, the culture of an organization, because I think he's I think a great phrase that it's a field tilting speed merchant. The NFL is now biased towards your Tyreek Hills, toward these speedy guys that can burn the field, that, as you said, Andy, the flashy plays. And that's why I think that's the difference between Harrison and Neighbours, is that Neighbours doesn't sometimes, Harrison looks like he's not burning all the time, yet he's still super productive, where I feel like Neighbours is just a speed guy. Yes, he has some technique. However, why perhaps there's such a gap that I have them is that I still think Neighbours needs more discipline as a route runner overall. Mm-hmm. And the one thing, and Alistair, I'm gonna load you up with a question whilst I just give my answer to it. But what's the main thing that you look for in a wide receiver above anything else? So it can be absolutely anything. I'll tell you my response, and I look for route running and discipline. That's what I look for. I look for technique, because I think technique, as you go throughout a career, will serves as a great foundation for changing your game when your physical attributes start to deteriorate. That's why someone like Keenan Allen has been so productive. And that's why I think someone like Marvin Harrison, because he's got such a high baseline of technique, that's why I think he is so far. Well, no, maybe he's not so far above Neighbours, but I think it's chalk and cheese. It's a clear 1 and 2. The issue that I have with Neighbours is that he's still quite raw, I think, physically, and whether he has the discipline off the field to develop that technique, or he's just going, I'm this guy, get me the ball, 8 times a game, I might catch 3 for, 120 yards. If I'm not getting fed properly, well, then it's not my fault, it's the quarterback's fault. What say you?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's still going to be 20 years of age on draft day. Malik Neighbours is quite incredible. He's had 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns as a 20-year-old. I look for, I think in the modern NFL, my number one trait I'm looking for is separation ability. And it does not matter how you achieve that. It can be through craft, as you mentioned with Keenan, Jack, or it can be through raw explosiveness. But it's an interesting point you touch on, because if you do it via craft, it has more likelihood to survive multiple years, particularly as you age as a player. Right now, Malik Neighbours is really relying on pure speed. He's not a poor route runner, but he doesn't sink his hips on comeback routes, because he kind of doesn't have to. If he takes 10 hard steps forwards, he's able to create up to 10 yards of cushion, because defensive backs are terrified. And then as long as he stops, and he does stop quickly for a guy traveling at that speed, he's created that separation. But perhaps over time, he's going to need to learn those route running skills as a 20-year-old to survive for 10 years plus, if that's his ultimate goal, to be one of the greats. Now, look, Marv Harrison Jr. isn't a perfect prospect. When you watch him, you do see his contested catch rate is in the low 40% area, which is good, but not elite. You do see when there's contact at the catch point, he doesn't always come down with it. You do see occasional focus drops, but his ability to kind of move and stop at 6'4" is fairly incredible. And he has all of the craft, probably the best route running I've ever seen of a college wide receiver prospect. Before I move on to the kind of next group of 6 to 10, I'll say quickly, Brian Thomas Jr., who we haven't touched upon yet, I'd heard a lot of negative things about him before we started. But the more I watched, the more I liked his ability at his height to run at his pace, but also track the ball beautifully over his shoulder, set corners up. Again, a younger player. I thought he was really exciting. It's just a question of whether he can develop more tools in his arsenal, because defenses have gotten very good at playing too high and cover 3, cover 4 shells. And those deep burners who are only one-trick ponies, they're struggling more and more in the league these days. And Roma Dunze, who it's remiss not to mention him at all, Prof, because
For sure.
my God, his contestant catch rate skills are the best out of all of these wide receivers. He's up at 75%. So he's better than Marv Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors. He's the guy who kind of reminded me most of Keenan. He's just he's just dependable. Like whenever Penix threw it to him, he's finding a way to come down with it. He's not necessarily the fastest guy, but he just does everything at a very high level. So Adunze, I would love him as a Charger if the team could trade down and still get him, because he's supposed to be exemplary off the field, and he's a guy who I think could be very productive from the get-go. Any kind of comments from you, Andy, on the top 5 before we move to 6 to 10?
No, look, I think we've touched it all pretty well. Just sorry, folks, we seem to have lost Jack. It seems like Tasmania has drifted a little bit further from the mainland in the last 20 minutes, and he's doing his best to come back. But I think, look, we've touched on it pretty well. You understand why the gap between, let's take Dan Jeremiah's his ever evolving sort of top 50 players, and he has Rome Odunze like at times higher than Malik Neighbors, and I get that there's speed that they have, but Rome Odunze is, as you say, is just incredibly reliable. Doesn't have this kind of jerk attitude. There's value in sort of moving down and getting him around the 10 mark.
How about at 5, Andy? If there was a massive surprise on draft day, say Marv Harrison's gone, but Neighbors and Odunze on the clock, and the card called out is Odunze, are you jumping up and celebrating?
Yeah, I think purely for shock that this front office has taken a wide receiver at number 5. I've really been in what I would do. I look at the wide receiver room, I look at Justin Herbert, and I think, give that man his dues, and it would be awesome to see a wide receiver go at 5, especially if you can get one of these 3 guys. Would I be happy if it was Odunze over Malik Neighbors? I think I'd be fine with it. I think it's Malik Neighbors to me is the kind of, as I said at the start, the sort of sexiest option. Marvin Harrison is the safest, but I think the second safest is Rome Odunze, and replacing what Keenan provided to the team. And look, I'm not drawing a player comp from a 21 or 20-year-old to a 10-year Chargers legend, but there is the potential, like you said, you can see it, Odunze developing into that Keenan Allen role and that safety blanket for Herbert in yet again a new world for him. So I think I'd be totally fine with Odunze at 5. How about you, man? I think you've sort of asked that question relatively loaded, and you've come in with your own sort of opinion on it.
Well, I think there'd be an initial gasp, and then the pieces would come together in my mind. I would think, I would assume that Neighbors is not their preference for character reasons. That's what I would assume. I'd assume Harbaugh and Ortiz have decided Odunze is a building block that we want as part of our team. And just that his skill set is really as exciting, just in different ways. I mean, some of his catches are remarkable. So, yeah, I know a lot of Chargers fans would not be happy if Rome Odunze went at pick 5. Most would say, oh, we should have traded down and addressed wide receiver in round 2. I'm kind of that view as well. I do think the team would be best placed to trade down and approach the draft in that way. But if it happened, I would definitely not be upset about it. It wouldn't be a Quentin Johnston scenario. All right.
For sure.
We've got Jack back. Perfect timing as I move into my ranking 6 to 10. And these are day 2 players for me. So I only had 5 day 1 first round grades. These are now day 2. So wide receiver 6, this was really tough because there are 2 or 3 guys who play like him. But my wide receiver 6 is Lad McConkey out of Georgia. At 7, I have the fastest man ever to run the 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine at 4.21 seconds. Xavier Worthy out of Texas is my wide receiver 7. My wide receiver 8 is Xavier Legette from South Carolina, the 6'1", 221-pound contested catch monster who also ran a 4.39 40 at 220 pounds, which in the metric system is over 100 kilos. So that guy's moving. That guy's moving at his size. My wide receiver 9 is Troy Franklin from Oregon, the thinly built wide receiver who's coming off a 1,400-yard season for the Ducks and 14 touchdowns. And then rounding out my top 10, and I should say that this list is just purely based on tape, not based on anything off-field. It is Jermaine Burton from Alabama, who, I'm just going to say it quickly, he has been in trouble for slapping a female fan from the Tennessee Volunteers after the Tennessee Volunteers stormed the field after a win. He kicked a player. He left Georgia after 2 years to go to Alabama for 2 years, and there are reports that coaches for both Georgia and Alabama have struggled with this player. So I've heard there are teams who just have him straight off their board. He's not even considered draftable. If you just watch his tape, my God, he's so dynamic. He's a dynamic route runner, deep field catcher. He looks the part of an NFL receiver, but that is not all it takes to become an NFL wide receiver. So that's my 6 to 10 guys. Jack, I'll let you have the first word on this group.
Well, you asked me to have a look at some tape, nowhere near as much as you did, but I really focused on Ladd McConkey. I honestly think McConkey could go day one. I really think a team might actually take a flyer on him. Shades of, we both agreed that perhaps Cooper Kupp-esque, maybe a little bit of Doug Baldwin as well.
Nice.
I really think that he's got if I'm going to show my bias here, is that God, he's sexy at the top of routes. He's got elite footwork. I love the way he's got that shoulder shake. Really sets up his defender from snap to snap. I like the way that he can really differentiate what he does. I think I saw a couple of go routes, a couple of slants. You had some curls in there. I guess the only thing that would, there are a couple of things that might hold him back is that his size, whether his size and strength is going to get up to the next level at the NFL and whether he's going to be able to create that separation using a bit of physicality, because he does rely a lot on technique. He's a willing blocker, but he can get blown up very easily because of his size. He's had a couple of injuries to his ankle as well, or an injury to his ankle. But the one thing that people are saying, he doesn't have huge top end speed, but at his pro day, he probably completely showed that he does.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fast. But whether that translates to, whether he can translate that speed to the NFL, I don't know. But I think if a team has a slot position for him, I think that's where he's going to start. But I would not say that he isn't a wide receiver 2 playing on the outside. So Ladd McConkey, I really like, and I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the high 20s.
I agree. I find Ladd McConkey to be real fun to watch, and it blows my mind that you can say that someone doesn't have sort of top end speed when they're running sub 4.4 seconds for the 40. Like, it's all within kind of 0.2 of a second, 0.2 of a second between him and Xavier Worthy, the fastest ever to run the 40. I completely understand why you've got both he and Xavier Legette in your, following shortly after Ladd McConkey, because 421, like, you watch AD Mitchell as the sort of brighter prospect from Texas, but man, you notice Xavier Worthy, right? Xavier Legette has that speed, has that contested catch ability. Jermaine Burton, not a guy I watched a whole heap of. Troy Franklin looks like a really smooth operator. Yeah. But I'm really concerned, being 6'2" and 176 pounds. I just don't see that. I just don't see that translating all that well. But he's a real deep threat option. He was tied 6th for deep catches and 10th in college football for deep yards. 10% drop rate though. There's PTSD.
It shows up. It shows up on tape too.
It does.
He's got a lot of QJ vibes. Troy Franklin was my wide receiver 6 just based off the tape. So I look at the tape and then I factor in different stuff, how they tested the combine, things I've thought about more carefully, some of their PFF grading. Franklin's tape grade was really good for me. He finds ways to get open consistently, and that is a big time year of production. He's another guy who's just turned 21, but one of the real challenges of evaluating players is you've got to project whether this works at the NFL level. And someone's tape can look fantastic, but they might have some fatal flaw where you just think, nah, this isn't going to cut it at the next level, or at least there's a real risk it doesn't. And as you said, Andy, for him, it's his 176 pounds. That's a big red flag. And the other is play strength is a serious problem for him. You see he gets redirected from his routes fairly easily, and he does not trust his hands. You can actually see it. Now, he does have some really good deep catches on tape, ones that he's either, got open and caught it over his shoulder. But in terms of consistency, he will drop a quick slant, and he'll feel contact and just get blown up, and he'll be lying on the ground, and you'll be thinking, oh. So I bumped him from 6 down to 9. And conversely, there will be guys whose tape you might not love, or at least you think, I don't get what the deal is here, but they'll have something that you figure, oh, with NFL coaching, this guy could be really good because he has the ability to play at that level. And I had Xavier Legette as that kind of player. He had 4 seasons of virtually no production, and then this year exploded for the Gamecocks. He had 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns, and he can return kicks, and he caught everything thrown his way. I sent that video to you both of him getting completely folded in half, blown up off a slant. He got straight back up. That would have put me in hospital for 2.5 years. I'd be doing the show from the Mercy for the next 2.5 years, or just on webcam. And this guy, like, he's just an insanely strong guy. And that's that 221 pounds. It serves him well. So I would love a team to do what the Chiefs did with Rashee Rice for him, because I do think there's some separation issues. But if you played him as a big slot, talented player.
Forgive me if you covered this whilst I had my technical difficulties, but have we had a round table about perhaps the philosophy that Harbaugh and Ortiz are going to approach with the wide receiver room with? Because I was listening to, I can't remember what podcast it's on, but there has now been a trend of rookie quarterbacks going into their 4th or 5th year. All of a sudden, those elite pass catchers that they grew up with from when they were drafted are now being turned away, or they're being pushed out of the organization. So I'm starting to think, and I could probably get around that, if a elite pass catching wide receiver is not taken at pick 5 and we choose to do something else at pick 5, and we'll get onto the tight ends later, but I could start understanding, and I could probably start to think that, listen, Justin Herbert is now a top 5 quarterback. It is now time for you to put your big boy pants on, and it is time for you to make these wide receivers better. And that's where I see perhaps some of the value in these guys that we're talking about. Your AD Mitchell, I know you've got them in that first round bracket, but AD Mitchell could easily fall to that early second. Lad McConkey might be there later as well. And I think that's where we might find some value. Yes, people might be annoyed that we're taking a tackle at pick 5, or we take a tight end. Maybe they won't be too concerned if we take Brock Bowers. But I think that perhaps now we have to start to live with Justin Herbert needs to elevate his wide receivers rather than the wide receivers elevate him. I think it's time. And I've talked on this podcast a lot about having Justin Herbert as a true leader of the team now. And I think losing Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, I could easily convince myself that they're going to take the approach of, we're going to shore up other positions. Justin Herbert, it's on you now to make these 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks production players. I don't know. What say you, Andy? How do you feel about that?
I think, and it's something that I thought we noticed and touched on heaps during the last season, is the comfort and the safety that Herbert felt with, Austin Eckler out of the backfield, Keenan Allen, and not that many. Look, it might have been the play calling of Kellen Moore, but not that many targets to Quentin Johnson. Sort of only really incorporating Josh Palmer into the game more when that was all he had. He found almost an instant connection with Gerald Everett as well, and you saw the the targets and the receptions. The stat sheet of the receivers really painted a picture of how Herbert, felt safe relying on those guys. So there is a little bit of that. But I think what you need to get out of Justin Herbert is you just got to trust these guys. You got to trust yourself to make those throws, and which he can do, and we've seen him do it. You've just if the read's there, if the pass is open, you just got to throw it. So I don't know. Maybe that's going to be a real sort of trial by fire this year without 4 big guys like Williams, Keenan, Eckler, and Everett all gone. It's going to be a real how mature are you? How much of a big boy, and you fit in these big boy pants, as you say, Jack. I think Herbert's got it in him. I really do.
So do I.
But the other side of the coin is, well, if you've got an elite quarterback, why not pair him with an elite receiver and watch this cook? A bit like he did with Keenan. But, those who think like that, yes, I think that could work as well. But if you watch Michigan and how they play football, and you watch Baltimore and how they play football, they're not going to be passing the ball as much, you guys, as you might think. I know Roman has paid lip service to how we're going to be a balanced offense. I think actions speak louder than words. He's got at least 11 years of offensive coordinator experience in the league, and Harbaugh knows how he wants to play football. They want to take pressure off Herbert's shoulders, have less on his plate. And if you're going to rely on more of a play action off a running game, it might be sufficient to surround him with a collection of versatile receivers, athletic receivers. You might not need an alpha dog.
Correct.
You might need a guy who I'm going to talk about right now, because I'll move to the 11 to the 15 rankings, a guy who might be able to come across on a drag route off play action. And so these are still day 2 players for me. I found this incredibly difficult to split, Andy. I know you'll have an opinion. So I've got 11A Roman Wilson, slot receiver from Michigan.
Get that one first, for sure.
11B Ricky Pearsall, slot receiver from Florida. How I see them both quickly, I see Roman Wilson as more sudden, straight line runner, explosive. I see Ricky Pearsall as a way better, more sexy route runner, contested catch, elusive yak. And for our scheme, I feel like Roman Wilson's the guy, because I feel like he will actually burn and win in a straight line. And he does have really good hands, only a 2% drop rate in his career, Roman Wilson. So I think that would work for us. Pearsall, I'd love in a spread offense where you line him up in the slot and let him go to work, shaking around defenders elusively. And he could be a high volume kind of slot receiver. But I was thinking for this one a little more about the Chargers specifically. So they're 11A and 11B. 13 for me is probably surprising for some. I have Jalen Polk from Washington, who is Adunze's foil. My only concern about him is whether athletically he makes the grade, but his tape and his acrobatic hands catching, and he's the way he takes a skip step before declaring when he runs his routes. I thought he'd be a great Z receiver, so as a wide receiver too, with good body control and hands at the catch point. And then rounding out my top 15, at 14, I have Keon Coleman from Florida State, the 6'3", 213-pound former star basketballer, Jack. Get wins at the post, take it up to the paint, slam dunk that shit.
Okay.
He is able to just post up defenders and box them out and catch everything, including in the red zone. However, he might have been one of the slower receivers off the mark that I've seen. He's a fairly awful route runner. It looks like you're watching the game in slow motion. But he did actually have the fastest gauntlet drill time at the combine. So what that tells me is he's got really good trust in his hands. So that's the one where you just run a straight line and catch balls to the left and right. He clocked up 20 miles per hour doing that. And you see some of the guys who had faster 40 times ran slower because they're so worried about catching the ball, whereas he was just bang, bang, in stride. So I think that's a good sign for Keon Coleman. And my last in the top 15 is Devontae Walker from North Carolina, who is a straight-up, deep-speed vertical receiver, 4.3640. I figured that this guy is he could work in the same role as Marquez Valdez-Scantling or Jalen Hyatt. I just think he's a better type of that receiver. So those are 11 to 15 for me. Wilson, Pearsall, Polk, Keon Coleman, and Devontae Walker. Andy, I'll throw to you first because I know you've watched a bit of Ricky Pearsall yourself.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of Roman Wilson too, and we had this discussion, the two of us. You make a really good point that the scheme fit for Roman Wilson sort of is why you have him higher, and he has that sudden athleticism. I loved watching Ricky Pearsall. You guys talked about what you like to see in a receiver, and sure, it's like route running, separation, hands, that sort of stuff. What I saw from Ricky Pearsall off the ball was awesome. And I know it's not the be all and end all when you're scouting a receiver. Definitely 6'1", 189 pounds, projects as a slot receiver. Within 8 minutes of watching the game against LSU, I almost loved him. Great footwork. It's fantastic. Creates more separation than his perceived speed should allow him to with his shimmies, head and shoulder work, bursts off the line, which allows him to win more often than not in press coverage. In off-ball coverage, he can turn on a dime. So the minute that you think he's going deep or cutting in, the hitches and the comebacks are a win, a big win for Ricky Pearsall. A real team operator. When he's not in the play, he seeks out a defensive back to block. He's moving up to the next level to go the safety when one of his other receivers is moving up the field with yards after catch. I'd say he loves the contact. Like he's a real blue collar kind of guy, and not massive by any means. Plays so much bigger than he is.
That one-handed catch against Charlotte might be the best catch of all time. The one where he catches it in one hand and then just gets crunched by two defenders, and he's got the ball in his hand.
You could say that he probably leaves the ground a little bit more than he needs to.
Agree.
But he just does. He has a real knack at going up, getting the ball, and protecting it down to the ground. 3% drop rate, 42-inch vertical. Really
amazing.
Wow. It all this stuff shows in his tape. I thought of, and it's a big call. I don't like doing the player comps, but I thought of, with the kind of heart that this guy has, Wes Welker, Julian Edelman type of guy, only to then check the PFF, the big board right up the PowerPoint, and Julian Edelman's right there. So little tick for me, but it's that kind of all-roundedness that I just see a lot of value in. If we go more down the run first kind of option, protecting Herbert, pick up a defensive piece in the first round, and wide receivers there to be taken in the second. Maybe the top of the second. It just depends. We've seen what's happened with the Buffalo wide receiver room. There are teams who later in that first round are going to be really hungry for a receiver, and just like we saw in last year's draft, 4 of them went in a row. There'll be 3 pretty early on, 3 in the top 10, and then you could see a run on guys like A.D. Mitchell, Brian Thomas Jr., and Ladd McConkey as well, going in at the back end of the first round. Ricky Pearsall could be, I might be overvaluing him, but I think second round prospect is really fair because he has those intangibles. Keon Coleman was an interesting one. Watched his game against LSU. Seem to watch most guys against LSU if I do get to some of the tape. I thought he signposted a lot of his relevance in the play. His body language, if he wasn't sort of one of the first 2 reads, was like, it just tells the DB, this guy's not getting the ball. I can take the play off because he's mentally taken the play off. Slow as real labouring, but sort of once he gets going, he's that one speed guy and has the size, 6'3", 213. You made the basketball comment. He actually struck me as more of a sort of tight end type anyway. Please don't ever make a basketball analogy again, because Jack played basketball and I know he felt sick to the stomach listening to that one. I just enjoyed it.
He gets to the key, man.
Yeah. Paints the key. Good one. Jalen Polk, great catching. And Devontae Walker. I don't know. There was a little bit of tape that I watched that maybe Drake May wasn't having the best game, but was sailing a few balls, and I just didn't get that kind of all-rounded approach from him.
No, and he doesn't have it. I just think he does have an ability to stack the corner and win to the outside deep. And that is, you only usually get 2 or 3 guys in a class who can do that. And he's one of them. He can win to the outside. He does drift towards the sideline, though. So sometimes he forces them to be uncatchable with the way he runs his routes. Anything from you, Jack, before I move to the next group? And I'll try to go through those much more quickly.
Again, I would not be surprised if this is where the value is going to be found. If we trade down as well and say we get an 11 and a 23, then we're picking very early in the second round again. I would love to see, and you alluded to it, Alistair, the style of offense that Roman's going to run. Those guys that have really good technique, refined technique in a short area, and that short area quickness, your Pearsalls, those guys that have incredible can get separations in a phone booth, as they say, and also who are tougher than a coffin nail. You know, those guys that are willing to block in the run game. And I always think blocking, especially when you're a wide receiver, Keenan Allen was always really renowned for his blocking. Not a big guy, but he knew the value of it. So I think those Ricky Pearsalls, your Lad McConkeys, those type of guys, I would love to see on this team, because we haven't really had those slot. We had, the closest we got is Michael Bandy. Yeah, cool. Alex Harrison. Oh, yeah, cool. They are nowhere near sort of that top tier talent that we're talking about here. But I could very happily, and I hope listeners as well, you might open your minds a little bit, because I know that there are people that are so keen to have a superb pass catching talent to pair with Justin Herbert. Perhaps, think about the organization, think about the longevity, think about all these other things. And I think hopefully we might see one of these guys in sort of early day 2, or perhaps later in the first round if we accumulate some picks with a trade down.
I agree. And just on the blocking aspect, Keon Coleman is a fantastic blocker with his size. A bit like Hakeem Olajuwon. All right, that'll be the last basketball reference. No more. Okay.
Never ever say that. No.
Moving on. So these guys
Al spent the last 3 minutes that Jack and I have been talking, Googling a basketball player.
Who's the best blocker in the NBA?
Yeah, okay. Let's. I'll give up on that, listeners. I won't make your ears bleed any further. So what I'm going to do now, in the interest of time, is I'm just going to read out 16 to 25 in a collection, and then at the end you can share any thoughts. These for me are all day 3 players, so round 4 or later is where I'd like to see them. 16, I have Javon Baker from UCF, former Alabama wide receiver. 17, I have Johnny Wilson from Florida State, the 6'6" receiver, probably one of the most fun players to watch in the whole class because of his wingspan and catch radius. At 18, I have a guy who Jack's watched, Jamari Thrash from Louisville. At 19, I have Malik Washington, slot receiver out of Virginia. At 20, I have Anthony Gould from Oregon State, another slot style of receiver. At 21, a guy I'm lower on than most of the consensus is Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. The Debo comp with him is ridiculous. Debo is 5'11", 214. Corley is 5'11", 215. Debo ran a 4.48. Corley ran a 4.47. They play in the exact same way. Get into his hands, rumble down the ground. I just thought he was a terrible catcher of the football. And really, I found him mostly a boring watch unless he played teams like LA Tech and guys who just couldn't stop him, and then he'd have 180 yards.
Incredibly raw, though. He spent his first 2 college seasons as a running back. So you see that when he does have the ball, his vision up the field's great. He's just really raw with release, footwork, route running, all those sort of things. So if he could turn into a Debo Samuel, you'd be getting a steal on day 3, wouldn't you?
And this might be one where I look stupid in the end. I can understand why some people would have him as high as 11 in the class. I just didn't love
11.
Didn't love the tape.
Okay.
Last few, at 22, I have Jerry Rice's son, Brendan Rice, out of USC. At 23, I have his partner at USC, Taj Washington, the smaller slot receiver. At 24, I have another slot receiver. There are plenty in this class, Jacob Cowing from Arizona. And then at 25, I have the third Washington Husky, Jalen McMillan, the slot receiver. So those are my 16 to 25 boys. I'll let you take it wherever you want to go, Jack, from that group of players.
The only one I looked at there, because that was getting to the limits of my time, was Jamari Thrash You gave him to me. I don't see him as even a starting option later in his career, possibly a rotational piece in the NFL. Elite speed, perhaps, but that's a slot. Just another comment. You said before just then that there are lots of slots in this draft. So, I wouldn't mind seeing us taking a specific slot guy, as I said, whether it's one of those guys we talked about earlier or someone with that skill set, but also later in day 3, you can find those players with elite athletic capability. So your Darius Davises, who knows with the new kickoff rules what that might mean. But yeah, Jamari Thrash was the only guy I looked at, and I didn't think he was particularly. I mean, he'll probably get drafted, but I don't think he'll be a solid prospect in years to come. Andy,
I saw him like you, Jack. I thought he's a wide receiver 3 or 4 gadget or motion player, but I did think, to myself, could he do more in a pro style offense just because of the quarterback play at Louisville?
Well, he hardly got targeted.
Very run first, yeah,
and he hardly got targeted. Like he would have been the 3rd or 4th option generally, which is bizarre. It was tough watching.
Yeah, I think that when you're looking at the day 3 guys, there is a varying characteristics of slot guys and physical specimens. Johnny Wilson is a big man and fun to watch, as you said, Al. But I think it all depends on the value that you can get there is relative to how you approach what we do need in the speed and the versatility of the entire position group. So, look, there's plenty. I don't have anything too much to say. I thought that the Malachi Corley one was interesting because I have seen him, ranked highly, and so I put a little bit of watch into that, and just thought that there is potential. There are things, it's about whether the deficits of a player can be coached up, and I think you can, develop his deficits. And look, maybe your face will be mud, but who knows? There's always 1 or 2 on the day 3. Whether there's worth on day 2 going after a slot guy, as we've spoken about, Ricky Pearsall or Roman Wilson, Julian Edelman was a 7th round receiver. So there's reason for maybe a Malik Washington or a Taj Washington in rounds 5 or something. But then I think that you're sort of just upgrading on Darius Davis a little bit, who I think we took in the 4th round last year. So, as far as a return specialist in the 4th round, why would you do it? But look, it's a new age. It's a new age at Chargers Park. So there's a lot of good names.
I might put you both on the spot here. And just to round it out for those playing at home, the ones who didn't make the list, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint from Georgia. If there's any guy whose testing is terrible but might actually make it in the NFL, look out for Rosemy-Jacksaint. I really liked his tape. And then finally, I had Aeneas Smith out of Texas A&M. So TDU crew, they're the 27 players. Any of them you want to talk to us about in the comments, have at it. Let me know where I'm way too low or way too high on somebody. But here's my surprise question to you both. Maybe, Jack, you can start. You can choose one of these receivers I've mentioned that you would most like to see wearing the powder blues. And it can be, depending on what round they get in. So you can factor in where they are taken. Who's the one guy you would love to watch wearing the powder blues next year?
I am a fan of a trade down at 5. So as much as I'd love to say Marvin Harrison, I'm not going to because I'm a realist, I think. I would love seeing Ladd McConkey. Yeah, I would love seeing Ladd McConkey, and we take him at the top of the 2nd as a true slot to replace Keenan. I think with QJ, with Josh Palmer, with Darius Davis, and finding another couple of burners deep in day 3, because I reckon there's going to be hopefully a couple of trade downs, which means we accumulate picks at sort of that round 5, 6, 7. I would love to see Ladd McConkey there. I'd love to see Justin Herbert throwing to a Julian Edelman type. 8 catches, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns weekly. That would be fun. Ladd McConkey. Give me him.
Nice.
Andy. Look, I think that I'm also of the philosophy of the trade down situation, and in a crazy ideal world, I'd love to see us, trade 5 for 11 and 23 with Minnesota, and have the off-field concerns spook teams and be able to pick up Malik Neighbors at 11. That is, I think, would be hot sauce. So I'm going to stick to my guns and hope that Jim Harbaugh is the guy to direct him into being a better human being, I suppose. So that's, I think, the number one guy. Yep, I see it as big value. I don't think it'll happen. It's not my decision to make, of course, which is, I guess, a good thing. But yeah, I think, Malik Neighbors at 11 would be awesome. I'd be completely fine with Roma Dunze as well. Jack, while you were dealing with some issues, that was the kind of conversation that Al and I were having with, would Rome be a better option at 5? Who knows? All right. That's almost a whole episode on just the wide receivers, but it's valuable because it is such an awesome class. We will move just inside the formation and talk about the tight ends. It's been a position in, recent Chargers history where we've been so lucky to have, the heroics of Antonio Gates. Hunter Henry was a great third-round pickup who just sort of came and went after an injury. But we've had far too many flashes from Donald Parham, a short-lived stint from the dog, Gerald Everett. The team's whiffed recently on Trey McShitty. And Stone Smart, I think, just isn't quite up to league standards, even as a depth piece. So what the team's done this offseason is brought in some just classic Harbaughian kind of guys.
Harbaughian, I like that. That's great. That's awesome.
Not just an idiot. Will Disley, Hayden Hurst, and Ben Mason, the tight end fullback guy. The first two named there are clearly more blocking tight ends than receivers. Jack, I know you're still really in the the Bowers at 5 would be totally okay. It's pouring, it's just oozing through your pores as you sit there. How do you see the need or priority of selecting a tight end this year? Now that we've beefed up the room, I feel a lot better for how it is than it was this time last year. How do you see the team's philosophy in selecting a tight end?
It just makes sense. It makes far more sense than a wide receiver at that high, purely because of the versatility a tight end has in the running game. And you'd think that, as we've noted it over and over and over again, that it's going to be a run-heavy offense. Watching Lad McConkey, and I tried so hard to focus on what he was doing in the tape that I watched, but I couldn't, because there was another guy on the field that was just doing ridiculous things. Shades of Kelsey, shades of Laporta, what he did this year. This guy's a freak. This guy's an absolute freak. And I got burnt last year because I loved Dalton Kincaid. I loved Laporta. And I really thought that we were going to take a tight end where we were. Those guys have turned into, Kincaid, you could probably say. Who was the third one? I had him in my head. It's on the tip of my tongue. The top end went to Buffalo.
That was Kincaid.
Kincaid. Who's the one that went? Michael Mayer, of course. Sorry, that's Raiders.
Sorry, mate. Well
sorry,
done.
Michael Mayer. I love those three guys, and I was really wishing we'd have him. But this guy, what he does after the catch and the way that he gets separation is something that the Chargers have never really had. We have our competitors have that. Kelsey's that Y-ish tight end.
Gates taking shots. I like it.
Oh no, but Gates was a tight end for a different time, right? He was he was a
totally
tight end, and he was a basketball player, guy that could post up, jump up, grab that rebound, solid feet, solid base, and pull those catches. But Brock Bowers is something else. He would be the way I think that this offense could move forward. He's a Mark Andrews type. You think of the way that Mark Andrews blocks, but also is incredible in short yardage. And then after the catch, 6'4",
Curry type.
6'4", 240. But I tell you what, you tell me when you're watching him, if you think he's 110 kilos or 240 pounds. There is no way in hell that he moves someone like that. It's unbelievable. Please, I'd be so happy with him at 5. I'd be amazed if we traded down and got him at 11. That would be the best case scenario. Give me Brock Bowers all day. Sold. Pick 5. I'd be a very, very happy man.
I'll let you answer this, Andy, because the nerd analytics positional value discussion and discourse is always, well, you take a tight end at 5, and with the value of the rookie contract by year 3 or 4, you're paying them like a top 5 tight end in the league anyway. Is it better to have a wide receiver at 5? Because if they hit, wide receivers get paid $30 million a year in the league, and you can have a guy on peanuts relative to what you're paying them. That's kind of the analytical view, and I'll give my opinion on this after. But what say you? Is 5 too high for a tight end just because you can't spend that pick on a tight end, mate?
Yeah, well, I think I ended the question that I was going to ask Jack prematurely, because the sparkle in the eye of Brock Bowers is 5 overpaying. Is it too much of a luxury? And I think it is. I think 5 is too high for a tight end for that reason. Jack, I'm interested, actually. I'm just going to throw you another question before we go further onto that. If you're looking at a slot receiver, like Ladd McConkey being the number 1 receiver you'd want to see in a Chargers uniform, how would you feel if the team, did go Bowers at 5 and McConkey at the top of, do you think that that's a well-rounded sort of approach to the offensive team building?
Yes, I do. And listen, people disagree with me, but you've got a burner in Darius Davis. You've got Quinton Johnson, who needs to be freed up in some way. He's not ready to be even a number 2 receiver. But if you have a defense that tries to go, okay, we're in a power set here, and we've got Bowers and McConkey on the field, but then we've got Darius Davis, or we've got QJ on the outside, and it's play action. How do we stop that? How do you stop that? And Quinton Johnson might not even be on a burn route. He might be on a slant route. And you're going, hold on, what I've got, because it's a power set. That means I've got, I'm stacking the box with 3 linebackers. All of a sudden, QJ creates separation on a slant. You've got McConkey that flips out in the flat. And then you've got Bowers that goes down the seam and does a curl route. How do you stop that? And that's the way I think that Ortiz is going to run the offense in between the dashes there. And yes, it's all well and good to have these burners that go on the outside, and we have these huge go routes that, Herbert throws it up. But how do you play for that? And I think off of a play action, and with Herbert's decision-making ability, I think to have guys that can catch the ball and have yak, which is what Bowers and QJ would rely on those guys to create yards after the catch, rather than relying on air yards. I think that's the way that this offense is going to operate.
Fair enough. I see more value in the way that they've built the tight end room in the off season. I see more value later in the draft than going as sort of, I know that Bowers has versatility across the line, outside and in line and in the slot and stuff, but I just see more need for like raw speed on the outside to sort of make that wide receiver room more well-rounded than kind of sticking and picking at 5 and taking. But
look, just historically though, if you look at what Baltimore have, name me one burner, name me one alpha dog receiver at Baltimore that they've had. And Steve Smith comes up, OBJ, but they were really
Bolden. They tried Hollywood Brown.
They tried Hollywood Brown. He had personality issues. Herbert is a much different quarterback to Lamar Jackson, though. So there was a lot more disguise in Lamar Jackson's offense. Flacco could still unleash it, and Steve Smith was great there. Bolden too. I think it's as much as we're going to be the Baltimore Chargers. I think it's going to be a little bit different to that. I think, sort of setting that in concrete is a little bit short-sighted.
Do you not see the versatility in Brock Bowers though? Do you not see the versatility? I mean, Brock Bowers is essentially a wide receiver. So, you could argue that Brock Bowers goes into the wide receiver room and he's going to be option number 2 or number 1. I know he's not, and I'm not saying that Brock Bowers is a wide receiver, but he is the quintessential wide tight end with his separation and the way that he runs routes. So not only do you have versatility in the run game, which is what Ortiz wants, but then you're kind of adding the versatility in the pass catching game.
Do you reckon Jack wants Bowers, Andy? Jack wants what Jack wants, but I think his answer was probably the best way to answer the positional value concern, because I still think you should be looking at the picks as a combination, and ultimately you want to pick great players, blue chip players. A bit like how Detroit approached it last year, taking guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Branch, and people were laughing about the positional value argument. But when you throw a blanket over the players that you've taken, the fact that you're paying maybe more than you would like for an individual tight end might fade into the abyss. If, like Jack said, you have Bowers in at 1 and McConkey in round 2, you can just picture an outstanding offense where you're going to have some running backs, a good offensive line, an overall weapon like Bowers who can line up as a wing back in the slot, in line, and McConkey running those over routes off play action like that. We could be really cooking with gas if we did that. So I know some people are out on Bowers at 5.
28
I'd be
times
up.
a game.
But if we trade down, that's obviously, to me, best case scenario draft day, trade down and find a way to get Bowers at pick 11 or something. To me, that is A++.
Yeah, agreed. He is, without a doubt, one of the best tight end prospects.
I love it.
Ever enter the draft. It's all very exciting, for sure. Al, do you want to just run through some of the other tight ends that you've had a look at quickly and some value that we might see kind of maybe late on day 2 or around day 3 and 4?
Yeah, I'll run through a couple. I only have 2 players I like in day 2, and they're Jatavian Sanders from Texas and Cade Stover from Ohio State.
Yep.
Sanders would have been high for me until he tested like shit at the combine. So he's supposed to be an athletic receiving tight end, and he does play like that for Texas. He was a good player, but then he only ran a 4.69 40, which was 9th out of 11 at the position. And he was just a average to below average tester. And at the tight end position, I think that's probably quite important at the next level to have the athletic traits. At least a lot of teams value that. So now I don't really know what to do with Jatavian Sanders, whereas Cade Stover is the opposite. He is Jim Harbaugh personified. He's a true inline Y tight end who blocks with full effort, kind of makes plays up the seam that are better than you would expect for the way he's built, which is 6'4", 247 pounds. But I thought the only rep I saw him lose was to Chris Jenkins at Michigan. But otherwise, I thought he had very sure hands. He fought for the ball in contested catch situations. He was almost like Jason Witten-like in the way he moved. So they're the only 2 I really like on day 2. Then on day 3, and then you guys can jump in, a lot of people are discussing Ben Sinnott from Kansas State. He, to me, was a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none type at this stage of his career. And he is like Bowers, but way lower down the list, where he's a flex tight end who plays fullback and all this kind of stuff. Tested really well at the combine. So everyone's excited. He came first in the vertical jump, broad jump, and 3-cone. So really good athlete, 6'4", 250. But on tape, I didn't see that kind of difference play. I'd seen him catch a ball in the flat and make Kool-Aid miss, but I just did not see consistent play from him at this stage. Theo Johnson from Penn State's another of these elite athletes whose film doesn't match the athletic prowess. And the last guy I'll mention is a player that the Chargers recently spoke to. It's Jared Wiley out of TCU, who's 6'6", 249 pounds. And I watched his game against the Baylor Bears last year, where he had 7 catches, 178 yards, 2 touchdowns. And I just thought, oh, there's a bit to like about this guy, because he had good long speed. He was another Harbaughian player, Andy. So I thought Cade Stover and Wiley are 2 guys Harbaugh would like, because you can see they enjoy the run blocking element of the game. Whereas guys like Sinnott, Sanders, Jaheim Bell's another, I kind of watched them and thought, yeah, I just don't know if you're it for the LA Chargers.
Yeah. Yeah, Cade Stover's been one I think I align to the most for the reasons that you've suggested, the versatility in his game, willingness. I haven't watched Jared Wiley. Dallin Holker, I think, is the Colorado State guy. He's
Yeah,
the
I
one
watched
I
him.
sort of consider to be more of a jack of all, master of none kind of.
Yeah. He looks
had
like a
great,
center. I don't want to call him a rotund, but his body size, he was a weird looking dude for a tight end. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think it's
Do-
go Jack.
Do we have any chat about AJ Barner, the Wolverine? He could be taken very, very late. 6'6", 250. He's your tight end 2, tight end 3. But have we kind of already filled that position with Disley and co? But, you know, inline wing back blocker, big dude, big dude. Could be a
Mason
UDFA.
effect.
Yeah, it could be a UDFA. Someone,
I think
because
I think he will get drafted. I think
okay.
I don't think he'll go to the end of it. But as far as the fit, you're just sort of then doubling down on the same kind of bodies really in the room where, you know, it comes back to, I'm starting to align a lot more with the idea of if you're going to take a tight end early, there's just such a gap between Bowers and the rest of the group.
Chasm.
If you can't get Cade Stover, then you are sort of left with like, shit, we need to take, we're more inclined to be taking another wide receiver later in the draft if you can't, like just for the pass catching inline, like slot ability, for mine anyway.
The gap between Bowers and the next guy is like the length of Chris Farley's dad's waistband. We're talking significant. Also, one thing I just want to pour some cold water on. Even some of our esteemed colleagues for other podcasts, I've seen a lot of mocking of a tight end called Eric All from Iowa to the Chargers. Can I tell you all now, listeners, that is not happening. He played for Michigan for 4 years, then transferred to Iowa because he suffered multiple back injuries while at Michigan.
Cooked. Yeah.
He blames the coaching staff for how they handled his back injury. And when he transferred, he tweeted, "Not everything, everyone are what they seem, and I learned that from my time at Michigan." And then he suffered an ACL injury halfway through this season for Iowa. So just on tape alone, he might be tight end 2 in this class, but he's had 2 back injuries, an ACL, and he slagged off Harbaugh's coaching staff when he left Michigan. I don't think he's going to be a Charger next year, just quietly.
Yeah. That's about as clear cut as Hayden Hurst was with his feelings towards the Carolina Panthers in his Chargers presser. Best I don't say anything further about them. Okay, tight ends in the books. Let's have a look at the running backs, fellas. We lost team and fan favorite Austin Eckler. That was kind of, the writing was on the wall after the end of the 2022 season. So now and Josh Kelly. So now we've got Isaiah Spiller and Gus Edwards as the current crop. Elijah
Say his
Dotson.
name properly, please, Andy.
Gus the Burst Edwards. Is that what you want?
Much better. Thank you.
Gus the Burst. Elijah Dotson on the practice squad as well as that zippy option. Like I said, a position group upended by free agency departures and change in the offensive scheme. Of course, now moving towards a more man gap operation rather than any kind of spread wide zone stuff. Edwards, completely understandable pickup by the Chargers. From the new breeding ground of Baltimore, and he'll suit that scheme, that operation. For me, I believe this is a position group that will be added to either on day 2 or 3, hopefully later day 2 at earliest. But yeah, definitely day 3. J.K. Dobbins is another name that's floated around, met with the team. He's also met with the Chiefs, and even though his injury history, he could slip in as RB2 to start off with. There's a bit of trouble, I think, brewing for Isaiah Spiller. Obviously not drafted by this group, and doesn't really have like professional tape to show for it, which is really unfortunate. I know, Al, you weren't hot on him coming out of Texas A&M, especially for where he was taken in that draft. But you would have thought last year that when the season was dead in the water, he might have seen a little bit more game time. Wasn't
coaching
to be.
malpractice not to give him carries, but anyway.
Absolutely.
I know Jack has a bit more faith in Spiller. I'm not. I just have doubts he'll be able to make up some of his athletic shortcomings. But Jack will usually say he was drafted really young, and he's a bigger back. Imagine pairing him with Ben Herbert, Jack. Maybe there's some hope for him yet.
Oh yeah, I'm still on the Spiller train. I don't think it's fair to judge him given that he's hardly touched the ball, and he's been asked to run in a scheme that probably doesn't fit him. He's also been asked to run when the offensive line has been has had injuries. He's been asked to run with a quarterback that doesn't necessarily that has been injured too. So I think it's not fair, and I think you pair him with Ben Herbert, given the amount of training that he would have done over the last 3 years. I still think there's hope. He's not going to be a burst run back that gets, that has these big long runs and catching out of the backfield. But I saw enough from his runs that he had that burst and that power to get that extra 2-3 yards to turn a 4-yard run into a
run
6.
that went 70 or something and then got called back. I remember he had one that showed he's got a bit of speed.
Yeah, but it's the power that I was more looking for, because I think he has the frame for power. But he might not mature until he's 24, 25. And given that he hasn't been jettisoned, I think maybe the current regime seems that they could find a role for him. And remember, this room is going to be bodies. I think this is going to be a big body room, and it's going to be running back by committee, as they say.
So I feel like, just bringing it to this class now, I feel like some people are sleeping on this class. I mean, I agree there's no... Actually, I'll temper that. I think there's more talent than people suspect, especially in rounds 4 and onwards. There are some really nice backs in this class. I actually think there's a guy who could end up being a proper blue chip starting running back. And I feel like he's not much worse than other guys who've been thought about at the end of round 1 and at the start of round 2. And for me, that's Trey Benson from Florida State, who ran a 4.39, so he's definitely got the long speed, has 0 lost fumbles throughout his entire college career.
Crazy.
And the stat that jumped out to me, and when you watch him, it's just unbelievable. 45 missed tackles forced this year, and his missed tackle forced rate over his college career is the 3rd highest that PFF has ever charted, behind only Bijan and Javonte Williams when he came out of North Carolina. So I don't know why, with a 4.39 40 and that kind of missed tackle ability, people aren't identifying him as a possible round 1 pick. The only real risk I see is he's only ever carried the ball 20 times in one game of his college career. So there's a workload question there, but I have Benson as RB1 by quite a gap.
Can I ask a question, Alistair?
Yeah. Go.
Just ask you a question. So you said that's a negative, but how? Okay, so you're the Chargers next year. How many times do you expect RB1 to be running the ball for the Chargers?
Well, that's what I'm... Maybe more than most teams, because of how frequently Roman ran the ball. It depends how they set up the room, and we'll get into this throughout the group. If you're going to draft someone like Braylon Allen from Wisconsin, who I actually hate, but we'll get to that. You're looking at a volume back. You're looking at a Derrick Henry guy who he's going to have some negative runs, but you give him the ball 20 to 25 times, and by the 4th quarter, he's so big and strong, he's just breaking tackles. A guy who's like, if you want 4 yards, coach, I'll give you 4 yards. He's that kind of workhorse back. But if they want to split it as a committee running back group, with Gus Edwards getting some of the ball, draft a running back who's a good pass catcher on 3rd down, then I think the philosophy is going to shape who you're drafting. And I'm not sure the philosophy yet. I know that for Michigan, they had 2 really good running backs, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and they just ran the shit out of it. Maybe that's the approach they take, and they are looking for a bell cow. And if that's the case, then you look at Trey Benson, who's never toted it 20 times in a game, and you're having to project something that you have not seen him do, whereas you have seen Blake Corum do it and win a national title.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of... I think, there's the philosophy, the league-wide philosophy of running backs in the first round has spooked people, because I tend to agree with you. Trey Benson is, for mine, a day 1 talent. You've got Jonathan Brooks from Texas, who did his ACL last year, so there's question marks over that. That's definitely not a day 1 starter kind of guy, but total gun. Love watching him run the ball. You got the little bit smaller height-wise, but fast. Jalen Wright from Tennessee, 4.38 40. Braylon Allen, left high school a year early to get into college ball, and there's tread on those tires, right? Which is
I'm glad you used that correctly, Andy, because that was a big bugbear. Whenever someone talks about the running backs, he goes, "This guy, doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires." It's like, well, that actually means that he's been used a lot. You want tread on the tires. Thank you for using that correctly. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
What was that? What's my name again? He's forgotten. He lost his train of thought. Here we go.
Absolutely threw me off. Audric Estime as well is another guy that sort of fits in that big body, big committee kind of style.
Love him.
There's just bowling ball attributes to that. So it's really like how the team wants to build this group. You've got potentially, an off season with Spiller and with Ben Herbert. You've got Gus Edwards, two guys that are essentially, I don't want to say power backs in the sense that they're, the big brute forces, but together, that's the sort of philosophy there. So does the team look for a zippier guy? You've got, I know it's just the first name that comes to mind later on in the draft, but you've got guys like Bucky Irving, who is that zippy. He's obviously more of a wide zone kind of guy that will slink around the corner and he's gone. But it's a really interesting. Al, what do you think the philosophy is to building this room for the team? How do you think would most likely go about, or what kind of physical traits would they seek to bring in to team up with Edwards and Spiller?
I think it's I think it's one where I'm going to have to see what they decide to do with it. Because, I think they're going to look for guys who have graded higher on gap runs, because I think they're going to run a lot more of that. So even though Jalen Wright, I love him, he seems like a player who's more of a one cut runner. Kind of get to the edge on outside zone, pick a lane, plant, take off, deep speed. Whereas the guys you're looking for in gap schemes, generally they're going to have to meet a linebacker in the gap. They're going to have to maybe be able to survive initial contact or have a bit of wiggle within that gap. Whereas someone like Jalen Wright has really good vertical linear speed, but that lateral jump cut ability maybe is not there like it is for someone like Corum. If they're looking for gap grade guys, you are looking at Audric Estime or Braylon Allen. And where I split the two is and I know I said I hated Braylon Allen. I should say I hated a lot of his tape. I want to acknowledge this guy started as a freshman at the age of 17 for Wisconsin. He's had 1,000-yard seasons a couple of times. Still a very young player, so I don't want to be disrespectful. He might end up being a good NFL back. For me, in his tape, I found he was way too slow to get going, which meant, and he didn't have any lateral agility. So I thought he was really a guy who just needs to hammer it between the tackles, and because he's so big, it takes two defenders to bring him down. But I saw a lot of A.J. Dillon for the Packers, or even a guy like Brandon Jacobs, who used to play for the Giants. I saw that kind of limited mover, whereas for Audric Estime, for a similar size back, I thought he had really good quicks. I thought his movement skills for a bigger guy was really exciting. I was like, wow, how's he just hurdled a defender? Or how's he made that guy miss in a short space? So I would take Estime personally over Braylon Allen. But if you're looking for receiving types, maybe better to complement the room, if Gus Edwards is going to get the lion's share of the carries with Spiller, you are looking at Bucky Irving, Marshawn Lloyd from USC, who has some fumbling issues, but if you get it to him out in space and he secures it, he's just going to take it and go, and maybe can get you a 60-yard touchdown. So,
yeah,
I didn't really give you a straight answer to your question, Andy.
No, but I think it was a really hard kind of cul-de-sac question, because who actually knows what they're going to do? My issue with Marshawn Lloyd is his vision. Straight up,
not great.
Just like a foot in front of him. He's like a newborn. Can't see more than 50 centimeters in front of him, and it's just like, oh, linebacker, oh, tackle, oh, smash. But other than that, like his jump cut is awesome.
Yep,
really good.
For context, I think we should look at, again, Andy, I know you said we're not trying to be the Baltimore Chargers, but one of the bell cows that the Baltimore drafted. That would be Ray Rice, and they drafted him. He was deep. He was at pick 55, I think, on in round 2. So you look
There's
at
some
his
Blake
draft
Corum
profile
in his game. There's some Blake Corum in his game.
But I also think when you look at physically, Ray Rice was quite light. He was under 200 pounds when he was drafted. And I'm thinking that Marshawn Lloyd is possibly the closest there. Just looking at his comparatively, in terms of their combine results are very similar. And if you look at Rice's draft profile as a tough runner with excellent quickness, he could become a solid starting back in the league despite his size. He may never be a true star or workhorse because of his lack of size, of an ideal breakaway speed. He's a guy who has a talent to be a very good contributor in the league. So I'm thinking that would be the last time that perhaps we can have a draft capital being spent relatively high on a running back. So yeah, interesting as an archetype for what Ortiz might be and Harbaugh are looking for.
All right, Al, any sleepers? I know you've got a couple that sort of their names seem to pop up in later rounds.
If you're looking for your obligatory white receiving back, who like a McCaffrey light, then you're looking at Will Shipley from Clemson or Dylan Laub from New Hampshire, whose tape I actually quite enjoyed. I thought even though Shipley's fast, he kind of didn't have great vision on inside runs. I saw a lot of quite short gains in between the tackles. So I didn't love that fit, whereas Laub was really third down, catches everything, including contested wheels down the field. Yep. A couple of names that a lot of Chargers fans will like. Ray Davis from, I've just blanked on him, Kentucky. Thank you, Andy. He is 5'8", 211 pounds. So short, squat, thick legs, does have good...
That's me.
Does... what are you squatting, mate?
Not that much. And I'm a fair whack under 211 and a bit taller than 5'8". So
I was going to say a bit shorter than 5'8", but play on.
Get fucked.
He's a really good 3-down back who, patient runner with good vision, bursts through the hole when he cuts and goes. Lots of good later round guys. So let us know, listeners, who you like. Did you like Isaiah Davis, South Dakota State? Some people like Rasheen Ali from Marshall. Kamani Vidal from Troy is another guy a lot of people like. So these days, day 3 is fertile ground for running backs. You will find a lot of guys who dominated at lower levels of college competition. Every single year, 1 or 2 of those guys hits. You're not expecting them to be good, and they're almost like carrying an offense from day one. And it's a position that can hit the ground running in the NFL. So lots of names. Who's this year's Tyler Algier? You guys can let us know in the comments.
Nice one. Yeah, interesting to see how that pans out. I think like we spoke about last week with the defensive prospects, Chris Jenkins probably being the most ideal Michigan guy to come across. I kind of feel like Blake Corum is that guy on the offensive side of the ball. We'll obviously see, just to sort of round out that room a little bit, share the load like he did with Donovan Edwards for the Wolverines. All right. Lot of chat about the next position group. We're going to hit the offensive line as a whole, the tackles, guards, and centers. It wasn't a huge sort of move based position this offseason, bringing in some veteran insurance, I guess, with Bradley Bozeman from Carolina Panthers to step in for Corey Linsley, who I don't think has yet made a decision on his future, although you kind of think it's like almost redshirting an all-pro vet to keep around. Did the right thing financially. Not everyone's all about the money. Will Clapp, thankfully, gone to Buffalo. And hopefully we can get a little bit more consistent play out of the interior of the line. You see Zion Johnson's looking jacked.
Oh,
man, like always been a big athletic dude, but golly, Jamari Salyer has just played so much higher above what we thought we could get out of a 6th round lineman. Stepping in and just sort of doing it all. Rashawn Slater and Pipkins, I think the three of us probably gave him far more flack than he deserved. He was serviceable last year, still under contract, but there's a lot of hot names. I think more often than not, you're looking at kind of 8 guys potentially going in the 8 tackles at least going in the first round. So it's a blatant belief of Harbaugh's. His philosophy is protect the quarterback. Everything, the one position that every other position on the offensive side of the ball relies on. When they do their job, it makes everyone else's life easier, is the offensive line. Build from the trenches and beyond. And like I said, although it's a decent line when healthy, it could be seriously the main focus. The non-sexy approach to sticking and picking it at 5. Al, do you just want to run through some of the names, some of the variability of the guys in the tackle room?
Where do you start in this class? It is just, firstly, you've got to start with a pronunciation guide. So there are 3 so just for the listeners, I've learned that it's Talisay Fuanga for Oregon State.
Of course.
Silent N, just like Tua. It is Troy Fa'utanu from Washington.
Fautano.
Because I'm getting a lot of Fautanu. Fautanu.
Yeah, Fountainu. Yeah, the N's not there, boys. And then there is Olu Fashanu, not Fashanu. So it's Olumuyiwa Fashanu. And
I think you're crazy if you're trying. After the Ruka last week, I thought as if you're going to call him anything other than Olu.
Yeah, I know.
And then Joe Alt, which you'll find you
that's
can't get
easy
any.
enough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
any more
it's
basic
on my
than that.
keyboard. I can work it out.
Do you know what the JC stands for in JC Latham? Out of
I
interest,
don't actually. That's a good one. You might have to get the Beast Guide up while I'm having a chat. So like this is such a good offensive tackle class. A bit like wide receiver. We're looking at it like a once in a 8-year draft class. And to me, the order I have them ranked in, I look at Joe Alt and I just think, one, his father, John Alt, was a Pro Bowl NFL tackle for the Chiefs. His tape is so good. Like when you watch, you would rarely grade negatively any single play of his. I saw him lose maybe 1 or 2 reps to JT Tuimoloau, who's a very promising Ohio State edge rusher, but he's 6'9", 321 pounds, Joe Alt. Outrageously tall, which is a bit of a concern, Jack. I can see the grimace, but he doesn't really play like he's 6'9". He does move really well. He is not a road grader in terms of demolishing you, but he moves you out of the gap. You just rarely see a loss on tape. Like his feet are quick enough and his arms and wingspan is long enough not to be beaten to the edge. He doesn't give up inside counters. Occasionally, he allows the defender's hands into his chest, which is that bull rush risk.
Yeah.
But my God, I mean, Notre Dame would often use him as a 6th offensive lineman wherever the run is designed to go. So they'd move him almost to like a tight end on the right side. And you just think, okay, they're running this way. And he'd clear it out and they'd get 10 to 15 yards. So he'd allow Harbaugh to do some of this unbalanced formation, 6 offensive linemen with 2 tight ends, a fullback and a running back, 0 wide receivers on the floor, on the field. He could do all of that stuff. Taliza Fuanga is that road grader whose pass protection is fine. Don't get me wrong; he's a good, stable pass protector, but he really, really kind of makes his mark in the running game, and he just has the funnest blowing up pancake blocks that you'll see on tape. Olu Fashanu is the pass protecting offensive tackle type. Why I'm concerned about Olu, whose name I actually just pronounced incorrectly, is his 8.5-inch hands are the smallest hands for a lineman ever measured in the history of the combine. 0th percentile. So, and you see this. So he's got the biggest gap between his pass protection and his run blocking. And his run blocking has really not been very good. And I think maybe the small hands has something to do with that, the lack of grip strength. And you also see that when he's slightly susceptible to bull rush, and it might be because he can't get his hands on his opponent as quickly, and you've got these long-armed, 35-inch armed edge rushers who are able to get into his chest. So even though some people have Olu Fashanu as a top 2 player because he's one of the best pass-protecting tackles to come out in the draft since a guy like Tyron Smith, I'm a little bit worried about that specific aspect of his game. Before I throw to you both, Troy Fautanu, he's the guy whose probably tape is the most fun. He used to be a tight end. He plays with a dickhead mentality. He's pushing people, blowing them up. Really, really fast kick slide. Probably the best kick slide of any of them. He really jumps out of his stance. highly athletic. You're not going to get him on inside moves because of his lateral agility. Very nice blocker out in space. And then the final name, who I see as a first round grade, although some would have Amarius Mims from Georgia in there as well. JC Latham from Alabama. He's
All I
the
got
guy...
is Jerome. I just got Jerome.
Okay.
That's all I could find.
Okay, Jerome C. Latham from Alabama. He is the guy who's going to be polarizing because he has some bad losses on tape. He really gives up inside counters all the time, and I didn't see him improve in that area of his game. But if you're looking at a guy who fits Harbaugh's scheme specifically, I think this is the guy. And it's simply 6'6", 342 pounds, 35 and 1/8 inch arms, 11-inch hands, and he's just so thick and stout. I think of those like Orlando Brown, Ravens-esque offensive tackles who are kind of big and really thickly built. JC Latham's that guy. You're just going to have to live with a lot of penalties. He gave up 18 of them over the past 2 seasons because he's not fast enough to get out, and he holds as a result. Jack, how do you see this class? You're our offensive line guru.
Yeah.
How do you see it?
So what I'm looking for is there are 2 measurables in the combine that I look for, and it might not be the ones that people focus on most for the big fellas, but it's your vertical jump and your broad jump. So what you're looking for in your vertical jump is that leg power and how high you can push yourself. So how well you can push up from your stance into the opposition defensive lineman. And the other one that I'm looking for is your broad jump. So how well can you transfer that power that you have vertically? How well can you transfer that into sort of like a horizontal plane? So how well can you transfer that power with when you need to get out in space to be able to block downhill? And the reason, and there are 2 players that I like more out of any of those 5 that you've said, is that's Fa'utanu, and that's also Fuaga, because I look at how they've tested in both those, and they're very close. They're above the 80th percentile in both. The issue I have with Joe Alt, as you said, I think he's too tall, but his vertical jump is only in the 46th percentile, which tells me that he's not a power guy. He's more of a technique guy.
That's going to be the height too, right? There's a limit to how high you can jump when he's 6'9".
I understand that. He's also very light. He's 6'6". He's only 321. That is light for a tackle, I find. So I would stay away from him purely because I think we need someone a bit more powerful.
Sure.
I understand that you want him when you have 6 down offensive line, but you're going to spend a top 10 pick on a guy that you're going to use, perhaps see in a scheme that you might run twice a game. I'm not sure if that's over.
And he also played left tackle his whole career, and you'd be swapping him to the right side. Whereas JC Latham, Fuanga, these are career right tackles.
Yeah, and Fashanu is it? I think Fashanu. Okay. The difference there, I think I'd have him over Joe Alt, but I still think there's a difference there. And I think that, that if we trade back, I'd be very happy seeing Fautanu or Fuaga at that mid sort of maybe anywhere between 10 to 15. I love the way they play. They're big road graders. You think of it, we don't really have the road grader type. Slater's technique, I mean, yes, he can get down the field, but I think he's just his personality. He's a quieter guy. Trey Pipkins is definitely not a power player at all. And I think he's hit his ceiling in terms of development. Zion Johnson should come out and be the power player, given how jacked he is. And Jamari Solier is more technique as well. So I'd be looking from a macro standpoint of the offensive line group. I'd be looking for guys that can get out, and I'm going to drop your helmet into your guts when I block you. So that's where I stand.
Fautanu as well, his pass protection is really pretty advanced. I know he's a road grader, but he's one of the only guys you see consistently using the snatch and trap move, which is that move where the pass rusher comes for you.
Yep.
You use their leverage, grab their hand, drop them down, and they end up on their face, and you sit on them, you land on them. That shows up. I think I watched 4 games of his. He did it effectively 6 times in those 4 games. So I really like the well-rounded nature of him. Some are a little worried about the size because, used to be a tight end. Is he a better guard? But he looks like he's got the arm length of a tackle.
I look at his frame, and I think he could add at least another 15 to 20 pounds, which pushes him into the 340 range if he's going to play guard. So,
All right, Jack, do you want Brock Bowers at 5, or would you prefer you trade down and Fuanga or Fautanu's pick 11 and you've still got 23 to use?
I'd be A++ over over both. I think shoring up the offensive line is key, and I think that's what good teams always do, whether it's through the draft or through free agency. I would love to see Fautanu at 11.
Nice.
Lovely. Al, I want to know, we've spoken about the positional variability, getting a guy that's played left tackle in college to come. And the reality is, taking a blue chip prospect at tackle, he'd probably be sitting behind Pipkins, at least for this season. How long's Pipkin got left on his deal? Until 2025? 2 more years, right? So there's... Yeah, it's a fair call. So do you have a priority in selecting a right tackle guy over a left tackle guy, even though they can come in and sit for a year? And look, we're not going to get a full season out of Pipkins. I don't think we ever have. We probably never will. Is that a priority for you when you're looking at a prospect, between 5 and 11? Or are you run blocking over pass blocking? Anything like scheme specific to what they've done in college? Any measurables like arm length? Like you look at Amarius Mims, who sat behind Broderick Jones and, forgive me, the other Georgia tackle, 36-inch arms or something, 6'8", like an enormous machine. You're not getting a bull rush to his chest. He does play big, so he does create a bigger target for himself, but 36-inch arms is enormous. Absolutely ridiculous. What do you think what is your philosophy for when you kind of look at these prospects?
There's a bit to unpack there. So on the first point, I mean, I think ultimately I am looking for overall blue chip tackle attributes rather than worrying more about drafting a right tackle because they played right tackle at college. I understand some people disagree with that. Stephen Haglund from Guilty as Charged is one of them because of the muscle memory argument. There are examples of players swapping and being fine. So Panay Sewell's an obvious one that comes to mind. Tristan Wirf's obvious one that comes to mind. Guys who played the other position in college and switched and excelled in the league. But usually there is a 1-year relearning process. Even a guy like Panay Sewell, when he initially played right tackle, wasn't so good as a rookie. But I mean, I'm willing to live with that for a year.
I think we have the luxury to afford that, right? With
absolutely.
The position that we're in.
I don't expect if they took, a guy like Alt that he would sit behind Pipkins. Personally, I think Pipkins would become the swing just because of the capital and the quality of prospect, and you want him to get acclimated to right tackle as quickly as possible if that's the case. So I see that the best path to that is playing him. But, some of your other questions, usually I'm agnostic about, usually I prefer pass blocking tackles than run blocking, just knowing that we live in a league where usually it's 60 to 40 pass to run. I think it's more important to protect the blind side of the quarterback and be a great pass blocker and then live as an average run blocker. Now that we've got Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, I've completely inverted that, sorry. So I am looking at Fuanga. I am looking at, Amarius Mims when he's out in space because I know that's the way they're going to play, Jack.
Yeah, and I think Pipkins now becomes a very interesting piece to trade. I still think that Jamori Solia can play serviceable snaps at right tackle. So I'd be looking at teams like Atlanta, who need to protect Kirk Cousins at the tackle position. I'd be looking at maybe doing some business with Ortiz's and Harbaugh's connection at Baltimore. And, if we do take a tackle, we trade down and we take a tackle between 10 and 15 or a guard tackle, that versatile spot that has the capability to start day one, week one. I reckon we could turn Pipkins for something like a 3rd round pick, maybe, given the nature of his deal. 3rd, 4th round picks. I don't know. And there all of a sudden we've got another day 2 or day 3 pick because he's surplus. As I said, I think from what I've seen from Pipkins, serviceable right tackle. The ceiling has been reached. It's taken a long time for him to get there. He reached his ceiling in his second second contract, which is never. Which I don't think is very positive. He's from an old scheme. It was drafted by an old GM who focused on basketball players at the tackle position with footwork. He just doesn't fit the mold of a road grading tackle. And I just don't think he's got the... I shouldn't say that because he played through injury and he did really push himself. But I don't know if he's got the blocking mindset that you want at that tackle position. So, could be for a team that's looking for a pass protector. And I think, someone like Atlanta really, with Kirk Cousins there now, perhaps wants someone serviceable there. With 2 years left on his deal, becomes sort of, you could almost sell that to someone. So that's where I stand on it.
Yeah. And I think his contract's around 8.25 million a year. So it's a stopgap kind of fix. If, the receiving team has more pressing needs, like Atlanta probably want to take an edge at 8 or something like that, a Jared Verse or a Dallas Turner. So maybe there is you can hold off, even though this year is, as we've said, it's a really special class. Receivers and tackles. If you need them, you get them this year. If we do look at, Jamari Salyer being able to come across and play right tackle, then that brings a whole lot more kind of thought towards the guard position for the Chargers, because we saw a little plug and play from Jaimez a bit this year at the guard spot. I mean, look, Al, I don't want to jump away from kind of late round tackle options for the Chargers. But
no,
look,
that's okay. We can hit them quickly.
You can hit that and then go on. Are there guard prospects that you value as top 50 people, or is that sort of getting a little bit sort of brushed under the rug?
Yeah. So okay, on tackles first. If just for the listeners, the order I have the next group of guys ranked in, I've got Jordan Morgan from Arizona as my next, and then Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, who's very raw but athletic. Kingsley Suamatea is another guy from BYU. Again, his tape wasn't great, but he's a 5-star recruit, and he's 6'5", 326 pounds. He's a guy who's going to go in round 2. Same with Kieran Amagaji from Yale. If you're looking at day 3 guys, Patrick Paul is probably the guy I like the most from Houston. Another guy is just outrageously tall, 6'7.5", 331 pounds. It's a really good tackle group, guys, and you can find guys in day 3 if you want, but the cream of the crop is where I expect us to live. On guard prospects, Andy, I didn't watch many of them because I thought some of these elite tackle prospects like a Fuwanga, like a JC Latham, even Fautanu, could be really good guards in the NFL and move inside if you wanted to keep Pipkins out there, or if you wanted to keep Sawyer. I mean, I'll mention one guard because I deprioritized them. I had a quick look at Christian Haynes from Connecticut and Mahogany from Boston College, but the one guy who I actually think is a perfect Harbaugh fit is if Cooper Beebe from Kansas State is sitting there in round 4 or 5 or something. He's an extremely experienced player, 5 seasons. He's played over 3,000 snaps, almost all of them at left guard. And you're looking at his kind of profile. It's really like a fire hydrant type of player. Comes from a football family, definitely better suited to a gap scheme because he's got more labored movement skills. But his strength, it's that real grown man strength, 90 plus PFF grade for pass protection. So just to name one guard before we move to centers, for me, it's Cooper Beebe from Kansas State.
Yeah. Yeah, he's someone that I've noticed as well. Well, on the centers, as I said, we brought in Bradley Bozeman, what's he on, a one-year deal. And it's just a sort of filler role. There's names touted as day one talent. JPJ from Oregon, of course. You're seeing him get selected in the early to mid 20s. Al, we've spoken off air about, they don't come down like rain. Potential top 5 or 10 league-wide centers. They don't grow on trees. Is there value if we use the model of the 11 and 23 from Minnesota, where we could almost take a tackle at 11 and then, to be real boring, go a center at 23 is, I mean, as unsexy as that is, what do you see the worth of taking Jackson Powers Johnson at in the 20s there? I know.
Well, we know
Jack
the
ain't
worth
about it.
because we've seen Corey Linsley and what a difference it makes when you have a top 5 NFL center. And I think the gap for between JPJ and the next guy is not dissimilar to Brock Bowers and the next guy. I just don't think that 330-pound experienced center who's equally adept run blocking and pass blocking, point guys out, snaps the ball perfectly every time.
But he's not experienced. He's a 1-year starter.
I'm just having a quick look. I mean, maybe he might not be on the same level as a few of the others in the class. So, there might be a bit more of a projection there. But if you're going to invest in a guy to project, I feel like JPJ's there. But I mean, maybe where Jack's coming from is there are other centers in this class I like quite a lot, particularly round 3 or round 4. So if you thought 23 is too high, because 23, it could be Nate Wiggins, right? If you got 11 and 23, you could be looking at, Latu has fallen.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah.
And then you might just think, centers, it's a very important position. It might be one of the most important positions on your offense. But you might think that there are other guys you like Zach Frazier and Bo Limmer and Hunter Norzad from Penn State. So, Jack, you're not about the JPJ experience?
No. I mean, I was until I started looking at his tape and also his combine results as well. Then also philosophically, if we're going to take the same approach of, hey, Herbert, put your big boy pants on and become a leader of this team, you've learnt behind Corey Linsley. You've relied on him to pick out the line and the coverages and what's happening with the linebackers and things. Linsley's still in the building. I think Bozeman is on a prove it. Bozeman had his last good year when he was in Baltimore, so they're hoping that he can replicate that. I just think from what I see, 6'3", 328, he's maybe a little bit big for a center at the NFL level. And again, if I go back to my lens that I use, which is the broad jump and the vertical jump, high, so big. That was high. I think he's in the 84th percentile for that, which means he has power. But broad jump, he was bang in the 50th percentile. And an issue that I have with him on tape is that he over leverages himself, which means that he relies purely on power to get forward. But when he doesn't have that, he gets blown up. And if there's
30 bench reps, 30 bench press reps though, Jack. So
I understand, but remember, Linsley was never the biggest on the field. And remember, centers are generally the last person to block, especially if the defensive are in a 4-man front. They're the last one to go, okay, where am I needed? And I need to back out. I need to back off and choose where I need to go. So I worry that a guy that's so busy about getting forward doesn't have the lateral movement yet to play good quality reps at center, especially.
He also has really short arms, I should say, Jack. Before him, so 32.25 inch, which is on the side.
In my mocks, I was taking him in between that 10 and 15, and then he started to really fall down my board after the Bozeman signing as well. That's where I land on JPJ.
Cool. Anything else we want to add on the interior offensive line, fellas? We'll touch quickly on the quarterbacks because there's a fair bit of special talent, and we're relying on a few quarterbacks going pretty early to really satiate our wants at pick 5 and the value of that pick as well. Anyone further? You touched on Hunter Norzad as a later guy.
We liked him, didn't we? His film's a lot of fun. I could see him really outplaying his draft stock. It'd be remiss not to mention Graham Barton from Duke as well. So he played at left tackle for a few seasons, but also had one at center, and he's 6'5", 313. He's kind of maybe more of the type of player Jack might like at the position, listening to some of the stuff that he's saying. He's kind of plays like a world championship wrestler. He's got these vice-like hands, and he's a lot of fun to watch. I think the value in rounds 2 and 3 is pretty good. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, Jack. I was a little lower on Zach Frazier from West Virginia than some other people are. I thought he had a really strong top half, but his bottom half wasn't as strong, and he kind of leaned forward quite a bit when he would engage his defender. But there are lots of good. I'd say center is one of the stronger position groups in this class. So if 23 is too rich for you to spend on Jackson Powers Johnson, I totally get it. and you can find a guy later in the draft.
I even like Drake Nugent as well. If there's that Michigan connection, he had his sophomore and his and his junior year, very, very good, rated highly. Knows the offense, knows the scheme, knows the calls. Could easily slip in at sort of day 3 pick in that, or maybe he's a day 2, or no, I'd probably put him at day 3. But again, I still think having Lindsley in the building is really important, because I believe he wants to continue to be a coach. So take a prospect. You've got Bozeman that can play day 1, and then perhaps fit a later round centre in there.
Cool. All right, it would be remiss to not talk about the quarterbacks, even though we've got Herbert, we've re-signed Easton Stick. Max Duggan, bit of a whiff in the 7th round, kind of never really found any kind of place, not that we expected him to. Do you think the days of the Telesco days of having 3 quarterbacks on the roster are well behind us? And before we get into, the top guys in this quarterback class, are there any guys worth it in the later rounds for the Chargers to look at as a QB3 for either of you?
Look, I think probably not. It would depend how many times they trade down, right, and how many picks you have. But it's not going to be a popular pick. I mean,
it's not.
But the organisations we like and respect, some of them do decide to continually invest in the position. I mean, there are, like, Jordan Travis from Florida State is a guy I really like from a leadership and playmaking perspective. So if he was there in round 6, I just don't think he's going to be there. But if he was there, I'd think about taking him. But the other, like, off the radar guys I like, even like Spencer Rattler from South Carolina, they're just going to go too high. I think they're going to end up in round 3 or round 4. And if you're waiting till right at the very end of the draft, Tua's brother is actually quite a likable quarterback for Maryland. I enjoyed his tape. It's do you want to bring someone in to basically fill a roster spot when you've decided that Easton Stick's your guy? For me, probably not, unless Jordan Travis is there in the 6th or 7th round.
Now, if you think of the quarterback room, why would you bother with a late round pick sitting there asking questions when Easton Stick and Herbert are going, why are we wasting time on that? I mean, the only other thing would be if Easton Stick wasn't signed is when you teach someone and when you take someone under your wing, I think you understand the offense better as well, because when you teach something, you learn it better. However, it's a brand new offense for both Stick and Herbert. I don't think they would bother bringing in someone even late.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, we could have this world where Stick continues to be re-signed on short-term deals year after year. I mean, or the other view is you take one of these guys in round 7 who's now on a 4-year rookie contract. Stick is here for 1 year, and then he goes, and the 7th round pick becomes your backup. I could see either approach working, but I think there's sense in what you say, mate.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, where do you sit and how do you rank? Like, let's say the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the class, because
let's go with Jack, because I've done this before on a previous show, and I think Jack wants to be a bit controversial is my hunch. So have at it, mate.
Well, am I going to be controversial? Yeah, I would take Drake May over Caleb Williams. That's where I'm at. I see Drake May's potential, Josh Allen type. I see he's got such a, I mean, yeah, listen, he can't make all the throws, but I think he's got the frame and he's more akin to Justin Herbert. And perhaps I'm more biased towards Justin, or players like Justin and true signal callers. Caleb Williams has the freakish athleticism, freakish playability. In his last year of college, possibly one of the best years of college football that we've seen. And the reason why I'm saying this is the underlying or very overlying thing in my mind is that he is going to Chicago. And I just don't know if Caleb Williams is going to succeed in Chicago, given the organization. So the reason why I say I would take Drake May over Caleb Williams is because I think Drake May is going to be more successful at the pro level than Caleb Williams is. That's where I fall, Alistair. What say you? Because I know you disagree with me.
I do, for the record.
Yeah, I do disagree with you. I mean, I've watched a fair bit of Caleb, including his Oklahoma days, and 2022 when he won the
Yeah,
Heisman.
freak. Amazing.
Yeah, but I think what's become overblown is this idea that he only plays out of structure, and I do think that was more confined to 23 when the talent around him was really bad. And I've seen him like, oh man, his base is so good. You know, you see quarterbacks like Drake May who get a bit toey, or their footwork is inconsistent. Caleb Williams is like the feet length are perfectly apart, and you actually see him go ba-bum, ba-bum, and actually jump squat each time to go through his reads. And then if it breaks down, he's Houdini, and you are talking about Mahomesian, Rodgers-like traits. So, I mean, I think his real weakness is he runs around with the ball a little bit loose. So you do see him, you see some fumbles, you see some bad interceptions. It's not like it's perfect tape, don't get me wrong.
So that was circumstance, a lot of it, though.
Yeah, and I am really looking at your ceiling as a quarterback. I do feel like there's a world where we're talking about him as the best quarterback in the NFL after Mahomes in a few years. If it hits, I take your point, though. Organizational fit is everything. And is Eberflus, Shane Waldron in Chicago the best place? No, I would say no, it is not. But are they doing a better job building talent around him there? Getting Keenan and DJ Moore, I'd say yes. And the offensive line's okay too. So
Cold, windy, snowy, hard-nosed football coming from I don't know.
But now you're talking about the landing spot. You're not talking about the player. So like Drake May, man, like he skips hitches. You watch him and he throws it and it's like bounced 4 feet in front of the receiver. And it's like, you could see him look at him and go, what the fuck are you doing, man? You see
but Josh Allen had the same issue.
Not like that. Like I know Allen had some crazy interceptions or he'd throw it out of bounds. May's got some like real problems with his footwork. I think May could do with sitting for a whole year behind. That's why I like the New England fit for him, where Brissett can start and you've really got to rework him from the ground up a bit. May, don't get me wrong, he is what you're looking for prototypically with his arm strength.
Gifted.
6'4", really good with his legs. So yeah, I'm a bit more. I've got Caleb in a tier 1, and then I'm really torn on Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and dare I say JJ McCarthy, who the more I've watched, the more I quite like what I see. I get it.
The smoke. You feel the smoke.
Oh, can I also say this? This is the best quarterback class as well that you're going to see for ages. Oftentimes when you're talking about QB4, QB5, QB6, you're talking about some real stinkers or guys who, and I really think Penix Jr., Bo Nix,
Rattler.
I can see all of them starting in the NFL. I don't know if they're always all going to, they're statistically, they're not all going to hit, but when you're looking at 5 through 7 at the quarterback position, you're usually talking about guys like Tanner McKee or guys who aren't clearly are going to be career backups. Whereas I see at least 6 of these guys as having a real chance to be starting quarterbacks for at least their rookie contract. How do you have them ranked, Andy?
Well, I think from an ability and the way that they play the position, I just the way I watch Caleb Williams and his footwork and the throws that he can make, and sure, it's the script versus off script kind of argument. I have him 1 and pretty clearly 1. I think you made a really good point about the prototypical size and attribute. It's just a little bit of a mental battle at times for Drake May. And I personally have JJ McCarthy over Jaden Daniels. I think Daniels is pretty raw and can do some great things, but the way that it sits in terms of, if it was Bears, Washington, Patriots, I see Daniels going with Cliff Kingsbury to Washington. You've spoken about how Kingsbury took Kyler Murray and how he operates with that kind of quarterback. I can see Daniels going at pick 2 to Washington, and then it's kind of neck and neck with whether the Patriots want to pick and sit Drake May or JJ McCarthy. And I think that there's a really good chance.
Or Marv Harrison Jr. Like, do you think the Patriots go quarterback, or do you think they go, no, we'll take Marv Harrison?
Maybe. I think they do go quarterback. I think they should go quarterback. But it depends how they how they scout and grade guys that would be available at the top of rounds 2 or 3. And I would prefer them to go quarterback because then there's more chance that someone will be knocking on the door for pick 5 and give us something to sink our teeth into. It'll be really interesting. I'm glad that we don't have to sort of be at 5 and worry about it, a la the sort of the Joe Burrow Tua Herbert situation that we found ourselves in a few years back when we were picking at 6. But yeah, a lot kind of does ride on that pick 3 staying there and taking a because there's every chance, the Patriots could wheel and deal and allow the Raiders to come up to pick 3. And you're not expecting the Cardinals to take a quarterback at 4. So I don't know, maybe it'll just throw create like bait in the water for the Sharks, just a frenzy. It's really fun to sort of think about and anticipate.
So much fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I don't think that there's really any worth in taking a quarterback later. I like you, Al, I like Jordan Travis, but I just don't think there's too many holes for the Chargers to try and fill. We're not going to be able to do the team's not going to be able to do all of it. And I think quarterback would piss fans off, to be honest. Like even a 4th running back or, a speedy slot guy, a Taj Washington later in the draft, that kind of thing would be far more valuable. A Nugent, Michigan lineman in the 4th or 5th round over kind of feeling the need to go up. They've taken a lot away from Herbert, putting him in another new situation. There's real value, and I think the team considers it that of having Easton Stick there. So bringing in a guy, even though he's on a 1-year, $2.5 million dollar deal, I don't think they'd bring in a guy in the later round to sort of challenge for that QB2 spot. And there's money for jam elsewhere. So yeah.
Can I just finish justifying my point about Caleb Williams and Drake May, please? We're talking.
You need to, sure.
We're talking about when I factor in. Okay, you look at talent, but I'm trying to factor in all the other things. And you said, Alistair, I'm looking at where he gets drafted and things. But you're thinking about pick 1, quarterback, talent, organizational transformation, turning into a winning franchise. You're thinking Elway. You're thinking Manning. You're thinking Terry Bradshaw. You're thinking Troy Aikman. You're thinking Eli Manning.
CJ Stroud last year,
You're thinking CJ Stroud. You're thinking these guys that, you're thinking Andrew Luck.
It was Bryce Young, wasn't it?
Why can't Caleb be that?
Because he's pick 1.
He is going to be that.
Because he's pick 1, because the amount of pressure that goes onto a pick 1 is just astronomical. And it's far more than any other quarterback that gets picked in that bracket.
Sorry, I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying? So it's not only is it talent-wise, but it's also what's going on up here and how well can the organization support what's going on up here. I think he's got the talent. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he's not a number 1 draft pick. I just think.
So you don't like the nail polish, mate? You're one of these old boomers. You hate it. You hate the gym. The millennials.
It has nothing to do with it, but because I think he's got it right. But does the organization fit, or is he going to do no? He is going to Chicago.
I think your best argument would be the Trevor Lawrence situation in Jacksonville, where it's the prodigious generational talent that sure he's coming into it, but they're like you won't see a better quarterback prospect than Trevor Lawrence, and it's.
You give him Urban Meyer, and then, yeah, you're right. It's hard to overcome surroundings with the additional pressure of being the savior of the Bears who've been stuck for 30 years.
And then all of a sudden you've got
Jay Cutler's the passing leader for the franchise. Like, God, wait.
But like
give the man a dart.
After your first year, you've got everyone's going, Drake May is a far better prospect given where he's landed. He's just performing because he doesn't have that pressure. The same thing with Burrow to Herbert. There's always that conversation. You could argue that has Joe Burrow lived up to his number 1 name? I mean, that's probably a conversation for another time. But I just worry that this talent is going to be ruined by Chicago. And it's up to Chicago, I think, not Caleb Williams. It's up to Chicago to prove him. It's not up to Caleb Williams. There's got to be a part of it, right? But it's up to Chicago. Can you do it? And my thinking is not.
This is going to be a fun one. So Jack said Drake May's going to have a more successful NFL career than Caleb Williams, or do you want to confine it to more successful rookie contract or something like that?
Let's go with the first 3 years. Let's say that.
Okay. We'll see you all in 2027 and we can revisit the take.
Yeah, bookmark this one. Oh, God.
If you're still
2
listening
hours.
after 2 hours, yeah.
Yeah, damn. Thanks if you're still with us, thank you so much. We had a lot of fun today, like we did the last week. It's a very exciting draft ahead. Lots of great choices and options. Al's going to go and enjoy a nice little holiday for a couple of weeks with his wife. Jack and I are going to catch up in person again, which is awesome. And maybe in a week or so, we'll sit down and do maybe like a 5-round mock draft for the Chargers, and both of us can discuss. I kind of actually want to do a 1-round mock draft and just fight with him over pick 1 for half an hour. That'd be pretty cool. But we'll see if we can get that going and do as much as we can in the lead up to the draft. But other than that, guys, please let us know. Argue with us. Tell us we're idiots. Al's been copping death threats on Twitter for various takes on mock drafts. So, no one's right, no one's wrong. Everyone's got their opinion. It's all fun. We take it in our stride because we're pretty easygoing dudes. But until then, Al, have a great holiday, mate. Jack, looking forward to seeing your mug on this table with me in a week's time. And have a great lead up to the draft. Bolt fam. We'll see you next time on TDU. Hooroo.
Caleb Williams sucks.
Backpedals looking, firing. He's got Floyd turning. Got it. Zigzag. 10, 5, high step. Touchdown.